I had always hated flying. The cramped seats, the endless lines, the overpriced snacks that barely qualified as food. It was all a nightmare. But the worst part was the people. The ones who treated the boarding process like a free-for-all, the ones who reclined their seats without warning, and the ones who thought the rules didn't apply to them. That's why, when I booked my flight from New York to Los Angeles, I made a strategic decision. I paid extra for a window seat. It wasn't a luxury, it was a necessity. I needed to sleep, and I didn't want to be disturbed every 5 minutes by someone needing to use the bathroom. My name is Ethan Carter, and I'm a software engineer. I was heading to LA for a conference, and I had been looking forward to this trip for weeks. The window seat was my sanctuary, my little piece of peace in the chaos of air travel. Or so I thought. Everything seemed perfect as I settled into my seat. I had my noise-canceling headphones, my neck pillow, and a playlist of calming music ready to go. That's when Clara Mitchell appeared. She was a woman in her mid-30s, with a boy of about 7 clinging to her side. The boy, Liam, was hopping from one foot to the other, clearly excited for the journey. Clara looked at her seat number, then at mine, and before I could even say anything, I felt that familiar sinking feeling. I was about to be dragged into some kind of nonsense. "Oh, you're sitting there," Clara said, her tone already hinting at the drama to come. "My son loves the window seat. It's his dream. Couldn't you swap places with him?" I forced a polite smile. "I'd rather keep my seat, thanks." If Clara had been a normal person, she would have understood and moved on. But no. For some people, the word no activates a special kind of internal hatred, as if they've been personally offended. Clara frowned, held her bag tighter, and sighed loudly, the kind of sigh that demands the whole world notice the drama. "Wow," she muttered under her breath, loud enough for me to hear. What a lack of empathy. At that moment, I knew Clara wasn't going to let it go. She wanted the whole plane to know that I was a heartless monster who had destroyed an innocent child's dream. If you've dealt with people like Clara before, you'll know that they never take no for an answer. They keep pushing, like a pushy salesman who doesn't understand that you don't want a new credit card. Clara kept staring at me, clearly expecting me to change my mind out of sheer embarrassment. But I was used to this kind of game. I didn't mind the stares or the manufactured drama. She snorted, looked at Liam, and decided she needed a new strategy. First, she started with the visible suffering approach. She sat next to Liam, who took the middle seat, and crossed her arms, letting out little grumbles. Then came the indignant whisper phase, where she started talking to herself, but loud enough for me to hear. "Some people just don't know how to be kind," she muttered. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw that Liam didn't even seem that affected. He was already busy fiddling with a tablet, probably more interested in playing Minecraft than looking out of the window. In other words, the whole drama was Clara's and Clara's alone. Then came the final card. Clara leaned a little towards me and, in a tone that mixed contempt and a last-ditch attempt to embarrass me, let loose. "I just hope that one day, when you have children, someone will treat them with a little more kindness than you treated mine." That was it. Now I was a Disney movie villain. She wanted to turn me into the cruelest of characters, the one who denies a child his dream. I wanted to explain that I had paid for the seat and that if she wanted a window seat so badly, she could have done the same. But then I looked at the clock. The flight was going to take more than 5 hours, and from the way Clara was behaving, I already knew this wasn't going to stop there. She didn't just want the seat, she wanted complete victory. And if she didn't get it, she was going to make sure the rest of the flight was hell for me. If I thought her drama was going to end there, it was because I hadn't yet understood the infinite capacity certain people have for turning a personal problem into a world event. Clara realized that a direct attack didn't work. I didn't give in to the embarrassment, I didn't get rattled by the hints, and I didn't let myself get carried away by the emotional theatrics. So, she changed tactics. If before it had been a confrontation between the two of us, now she wanted witnesses. She began to speak louder, as if she were making a casual comment, but making sure that everyone around her heard. "It's unbelievable. No one has any consideration for a single mother traveling with a child anymore." There you go. Now I wasn't just the monster who denied a simple request. Now I hated single mothers too. The lady on the other side of the row looked quickly in our direction, curious to understand what was going on. The guy sitting in front of her glanced discreetly over his shoulder. That's all Clara wanted, an audience. Liam, on the other hand, didn't care. He continued to be entertained by his tablet, his headphones blocking out any sign of drama coming from his mother. Deep down, I was pretty sure this wasn't even about him. It was about Clara, about getting what she wanted, and, more importantly, coming out as the wronged heroine of the story. If someone else spoke up for her, if a stranger said, "Let the child sit there, what's the harm?" she would have the validation she needed to insist even more. But the problem with this kind of move is that you never know if the audience will react the way you want them to. And luckily for me, the people on the flight seemed too tired to get involved in this circus. The lady on the other side just gave a half-hearted smile and looked straight ahead again. The guy in front completely ignored her. A stewardess passed by, handing out drinks, and didn't even notice what was going on. This seemed to make Clara even angrier. She needed a reaction, and if no one on the plane was going to give it, she had another option: the crew. Clara pressed the call button so hard that I almost felt the seat vibrate. If she couldn't force me out, then she'd make someone in authority try to bend me over. And at that moment, I realized that she was willing to go to any lengths to win this ridiculous battle. I knew it would come to that. Some people just don't know how to lose. Clara stood there, arms crossed, tapping her foot lightly against the floor, staring at the call button as if she had just activated a grand plan of revenge. She didn't just want me to get out of my seat. She wanted someone to do it for her. In less than a minute, a flight attendant appeared, smiling and professional. The typical polite tone of someone who has dealt with all kinds of nonsense in this world. "How can I help you?" the flight attendant asked. Clara took a deep breath, as if she was holding back tears. This was when she was going to unleash her final card. "Look, I wouldn't normally complain, but I'm having a very difficult journey. I'm a single mother, and my son was so excited to sit in the window seat, but this guy here refuses to change." She paused dramatically, expecting the flight attendant to look at me with contempt, as if I had kicked a puppy. But to her misfortune, that didn't happen. The flight attendant just smiled and asked politely, "Did you pay for the seat?" "Yes," I replied immediately. Clara became visibly tense. She knew that from that moment on, the situation was no longer in her control. The flight attendant nodded and turned to Clara. "Madam, unfortunately, seats are assigned according to the purchase of the ticket. If this passenger has paid for this seat, they have the right to stay there." And that's when the big twist came. Clara realized that her plan was falling apart and decided that if being polite didn't work, maybe going on the attack would be better. She raised her voice a little, not exactly shouting, but enough to attract attention. "Really? So a selfish grown man can't give up a simple seat to an innocent boy? That's ridiculous." That's it. Now I was a selfish adult man, and her son was an innocent boy wronged by society. The problem? She didn't realize that she had made a fatal mistake. Because at that moment, everyone around her realized that she was trying to pull a stunt. The flight attendant kept her professional smile, but her gaze hardened. "Ma'am, the passenger is entitled to his seat. If there are any more problems, we'll need to discuss it with the security team when we land." And that was that. With that sentence, Clara officially lost the war. But I knew she wasn't going to let it go. People like that never accept defeat with their heads held high. She needed one last blow, and that's exactly what she tried to do. If Clara had any sense at all, she would have accepted defeat and continued her flight in silence. But she didn't. People like her don't know how to lose without turning the whole situation into an Emmy-worthy soap opera. After the flight attendant made it clear that I was entitled to my seat, Clara realized that she had no more support. The crew wasn't going to force anyone to change seats. The surrounding passengers were visibly annoyed by her little show, and even her own son didn't seem to care anymore, focused on his tablet and completely oblivious to the circus put on by his mother. But instead of shutting up and accepting the flight like any normal person, Clara decided to double down on the role of the wronged victim. She remained silent for a few minutes, only it wasn't a normal silence. It was a performative silence. First, it began with long, dramatic sighs, the kind you only hear in Mexican soap operas when the protagonist discovers a betrayal. Then she moved on to wiping invisible tears from the corner of her eyes, as if she had just received devastating news. And then came the final blow. She started crying. Yes, she cried. It wasn't a scandalous cry full of screams and sobs. It was that kind of carefully controlled crying, with discreet sniffles and her head turned slightly to one side, making sure that a few people around her noticed. She wanted someone to feel guilty for her. She wanted someone, anyone, to look at me with judgment and say, "You could have given up the seat to the poor, tired mother." Except there was a problem. No one else fell for it. The passengers were tired. They just wanted to get on with the flight without any more courtroom scenes. The flight attendant had already made it clear that I wasn't obliged to change seats, and most importantly, Liam didn't give a damn about the window. Gradually, Clara realized that her performance wasn't working. She discreetly looked around, hoping for a sympathetic glance, but only found bored people. I continued to ignore her completely, and that's when the flight finally went as it should. When we landed, Clara jumped up aggressively, grabbed her hand luggage, and rushed off without looking back. She was probably angry at having lost the battle, but she didn't have the heart to try anything else. And so, my saga with the seat inspector ended. Moral of the story? If someone wants a specific seat, they just have to pay for it. I thought my ordeal with Clara Mitchell was over the moment I stepped off the plane in Los Angeles. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. 2 days later, as I was walking through the bustling streets of downtown LA, heading to a coffee shop near my hotel, I saw her again. Clara. She was standing outside a boutique, scrolling through her phone, while Liam sat on a nearby bench, still glued to his tablet. My first instinct was to cross the street and avoid her, but before I could, she looked up and our eyes met. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Clara's expression shifted from surprise to recognition, and then to something darker, a mix of resentment and determination. She quickly pocketed her phone and marched toward me, Liam trailing behind her, oblivious as ever. "You," she said, her voice sharp and accusatory. "I can't believe I'm running into you again." I forced a polite smile, though my patience was already wearing thin. "Small world, huh?" "Small world," she repeated, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "You ruined my son's flight, and now you're acting like it's some kind of coincidence that we're here?" I took a deep breath, reminding myself to stay calm. "Look, Clara, I didn't ruin anything. I paid for my seat, just like you paid for yours. If you wanted the window seat, you should have booked it." Her eyes narrowed, and I could see the gears turning in her head. She wasn't going to let this go. Not now, not ever. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" she spat. "Well, let me tell you something. People like you, selfish, entitled, heartless, you're the reason this world is going to hell." I could feel my temper rising, but I bit my tongue. Arguing with Clara was like trying to reason with a brick wall. Instead, I glanced at Liam, who was still absorbed in his tablet, completely unaware of the tension between us. "Liam seems fine," I said, trying to defuse the situation. "He didn't even care about the window seat." Clara's face flushed with anger. "Don't you dare talk about my son. You have no idea what it's like to be a single mother, to struggle every day just to make ends meet. That window seat was the one thing he was looking forward to, and you took it away from him." I sighed, realizing that this conversation was going nowhere. "I'm sorry you feel that way, Clara, but I'm not going to apologize for something I didn't do wrong. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a meeting to get to." I turned to leave, but Clara grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Oh no, you don't. You're not walking away from this. Not again." I gently but firmly pulled my arm free. "Clara, I don't know what you want from me, but this is getting ridiculous. Let it go." She stared at me for a long moment, her eyes blazing with fury. Then, without another word, she turned on her heel and stormed off, dragging Liam behind her. I watched them go, a sinking feeling in my stomach. Something told me this wasn't the last I'd see of Clara Mitchell. The next morning, I woke up to a barrage of notifications on my phone. My social media accounts were blowing up with messages, comments, and tags. Confused, I opened Twitter and immediately wished I hadn't. A viral thread had been posted overnight, complete with a photo of me sitting in my window seat on the plane. The caption read, "This man refused to give up his seat to a 7-year-old boy who just wanted to see the clouds." Heartless much. My heart sank as I scrolled through the thread. Clara had taken to social media to tell her side of the story, painting herself as the victim and me as the villain. The post had already been shared thousands of times, and the comments were a mix of outrage and sympathy for Clara and Liam. "What kind of person does this to a child?" one comment read. "Single moms have it hard enough without people like this making it worse," another said. I felt a wave of anger and frustration wash over me. Clara had twisted the story to make herself look like the hero and me like the monster. And now, complete strangers were weighing in, calling me names and demanding that I apologize. I quickly drafted a response, explaining my side of the story and pointing out that I had paid for the seat. But as soon as I hit post, the backlash intensified. People accused me of lying, of being selfish, of not caring about children. It didn't matter that I had proof, my boarding pass, my receipt. No one wanted to hear it. They had already made up their minds. Despite the chaos online, I still had a conference to attend. I tried to put the social media storm out of my mind as I made my way to the convention center, but it was impossible. Everywhere I went, I felt like people were staring at me, whispering behind my back. I even caught a few attendees giving me dirty looks. The keynote speaker that morning was a well-known tech entrepreneur, Marcus Reed, whose company had revolutionized the way we think about artificial intelligence. As I listened to his speech, I couldn't help but feel a pang of envy. Here was a man who had achieved so much, who commanded respect and admiration, while I was being dragged through the mud over a stupid airplane seat. After the speech, I decided to approach Marcus during the networking session. Maybe talking to someone successful would help me put things in perspective. But as I made my way through the crowd, I noticed Clara standing near the refreshments table, talking animatedly to a group of people. My stomach churned. What was she doing here? Before I could turn around and leave, Clara spotted me. Her eyes lit up with a mixture of triumph and malice, and she beckoned me over. "Ethan, come here," she called, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I want you to meet some friends of mine." Reluctantly, I walked over, feeling like a lamb being led to the slaughter. The group turned to look at me, their expressions a mix of curiosity and disdain. "This is the man I was telling you about," Clara said, gesturing to me. "The one who refused to give up his seat to my son." The group murmured disapprovingly, and I felt my face grow hot. "That's not the whole story," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I paid for that seat. If Clara wanted it, she should have booked it herself." One of the women in the group, a tall blonde with a sharp gaze, crossed her arms and frowned. "That's not the point. You could have shown a little kindness. It's not always about money, you know." I opened my mouth to respond, but Clara cut me off. "Exactly. It's about empathy. Something you clearly lack." I felt a surge of anger, but before I could say anything, Marcus Reed himself walked over, drawn by the commotion. "Is everything okay here?" he asked, his deep voice commanding attention. Clara immediately turned on the charm. "Oh, Mr. Reed, I was just telling my friends about this man who refused to give up his seat to my son on our flight here. It's been such a difficult experience." Marcus raised an eyebrow and looked at me. "Is that true?" I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Not exactly. I paid for the window seat, and Clara asked me to switch so her son could have it. I declined, and she's been harassing me ever since." Marcus studied me for a moment, then turned to Clara. "Did you pay for the window seat?" Clara hesitated, caught off guard by the question. "Well, no, but Then it sounds like the seat was his," Marcus said, cutting her off. "You can't expect people to give up what they've paid for just because you ask nicely." Clara's face turned red with anger, but before she could respond, Marcus turned to me. "Ethan, right? I heard your presentation on AI integration last year. Impressive work." I blinked, surprised. "Thank you. I didn't think you'd remember me." Marcus smiled. "I make it a point to remember talent. Let's grab a coffee and talk. I'd like to hear more about what you're working on." As we walked away, I could feel Clara's eyes burning into my back. For the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, things were starting to turn around. Over coffee, Marcus and I discussed my work, and he offered some valuable insights and advice. By the end of our conversation, he even hinted at a potential collaboration. It was a much-needed boost to my morale, and I left the conference feeling more optimistic than I had in days. But as I stepped outside, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was a message from an unknown number. "You think you've won, but this isn't over. You'll regret what you did." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. Clara wasn't going to let this go. And now, she had my number. The next few days were a blur. I tried to focus on my work and the potential collaboration with Marcus, but Clara's message weighed heavily on my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was planning something big. My fears were confirmed when I received an email from the conference organizers. They had received a complaint about my unprofessional behavior, and we're considering revoking my speaking slot at the next event. Attached to the email was a screenshot of Clara's viral Twitter thread, along with a lengthy letter detailing her traumatic experience on the plane. I felt a surge of anger and frustration. Clara was determined to ruin my career, all because I wouldn't give up a seat. I knew I had to do something, but what? I decided to confront her directly. I tracked her down at her hotel, where she was staying for the duration of the conference. When she opened the door, her expression was a mix of surprise and smug satisfaction. "Ethan," she said, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. "What a surprise. What can I do for you?" "Cut the act, Clara," I said, my voice firm. "I know you're behind the complaint to the conference organizers. You need to stop this. Now." Clara's smile faded, replaced by a cold, calculating glare. "Or what? You'll call the police? Go ahead. Tell them how the big, bad single mother is trying to ruin your life. See how far that gets you." I took a step closer, my patience wearing thin. "This isn't about you being a single mother, Clara. This is about you being vindictive and manipulative. You're not a victim here. You're the one causing the problems." For a moment, Clara looked taken aback. Then, her expression hardened. "You think you're so clever, don't you? Well, let me tell you something, Ethan. You may have won the battle on the plane, but you're not going to win the war. I'll make sure of that." I stared at her, realizing that there was no reasoning with her. Clara was too far gone, too consumed by her need for revenge. I turned to leave, but before I could, she spoke again. "Oh, and Ethan," she said, her voice low and menacing. "Watch your back." I left Clara's hotel feeling more determined than ever. I wasn't going to let her destroy my career or my life. I reached out to the conference organizers and provided them with all the evidence I had, my boarding pass, my receipt, even the messages Clara had sent me. Slowly but surely, the tide began to turn in my favor. The conference organizers apologized for the misunderstanding and reinstated my speaking slot. Meanwhile, Clara's social media posts began to lose traction as people started to see through her lies. Some even came to my defense, sharing their own stories of dealing with entitled passengers. As for Clara, I never saw her again. Rumor had it that she left the conference early, her tail between her legs. Whether she learned anything from the experience, I'll never know. But one thing was certain. I had stood my ground, and in the end, that was all that mattered. The experience with Clara taught me a valuable lesson. Sometimes, standing up for yourself is the hardest thing to do, but it's also the most important. I didn't let her bullying or manipulation break me, and in the end, I came out stronger. As for the window seat, I still book it every time I fly, because sometimes the little things, like watching the clouds go by, are worth fighting for. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's story on Store of Good Stories. If this story touched your heart or made you think, don't forget to hit like and share the video to spread this positive message to more people. And if this is your first time here, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of the meaningful stories we share every week. Your support is the biggest motivation for Store of Good Stories to keep bringing heartfelt and valuable stories to you. See you in the next video.